Welcome to the Confessions Podcast. I'm Cindy Wagman.
And I'm Jess Campbell. We're two former in-house nonprofit pros turned coaches and consultants to purpose-driven organizations.
After years of building up our separate six-figure businesses from scratch, we've thrown a lot of spaghetti at the wall and have lived to see what sticks.
We're on a mission to help other nonprofit coaches and consultants looking to start or scale their own businesses past the six-figure mark by pulling back the curtain.
Whether you're still working inside a nonprofit and thinking of one day going out on your own, or you've been running your consulting business for years, you understand that working with nonprofits is just different. We're giving you access to the business leaders who serve nonprofits as their clients. You know, the people who truly get it.
No more gatekeeping, no more secrets. This podcast is going to give you an inside look at what running a successful nonprofit coaching and consulting business looks like. Basically, we're asking people how much money they make, how they get paid, and what has and hasn't worked in their businesses.
Listen in as these leaders share their insights, their numbers, and the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to building a nonprofit coaching or consulting business. We're going to empower you to make the power moves that give you the income and freedom you set out to create from day one.
You ready? Let's go. Kamilah, what is it about rest that you are so passionate about?
It was so funny. Like it never was a conscious thing that I just said, I'm going to be all about rest right now. And I know, it's the NAF ministry has popularized it, and I encourage everyone to sort of go check out their ministry. I was mainly just craving safety, if that makes sense. I was in some kind of traumatic experiences with past work, and I just got burnt out, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. So it became essential to me for survival almost. I know that sounds dramatic, but I needed to slow down, and I needed to be taken care of, and I needed to take care of myself. And so I just, I make sure that I try and incorporate that. And it was interestingly, when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to rest, if that makes sense. I had a parent who, my dad always wanted us to wake up early and study and do work, and we could only watch a couple hours of TV, and we had to, and so I almost had this shame associated with resting until it got to a point where I was just like, look, I have to undo this and unlearn this and figure out, why I'm carrying this with me, and be okay with just chilling out. So yeah, that's a long answer. And I guess it ended up being a deeper answer than I was expecting to give.
No, we love it. So For everyone listening, we have the honor and pleasure of having Kamilah Martin of Katalyst on the show today. And she is a woman of many talents. In fact, maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world of the nonprofit space.
Sure. So thank you. I am Kamilah Martin, the founder and CEO of Katalyst. We started in October 2020. So I was part of the Great Resignation. There's a lot that went into that. Maybe we'll touch on it, maybe not, but I've been sharing a little bit more about my story and my journey. But my consulting practice is primarily interim executive consulting. That's what keeps the lights on at this point. So basically when a senior leader or a head of a team resigns or gets fired, there's disruption and turmoil that kind of tends to ensue on the team. And smart executive directors try and find, good people to kind of come in and help stabilize things. So that's what I do. And I fell into it. I wasn't out looking for it. I've managed teams pretty much my whole life when I think back on it. And I really, really enjoy kind of coming into a space, making it better and bouncing. So that's the primary thing that I do.
Okay, I don't think we've had anyone on the show to talk about interim consulting work, so I have so many questions. I know you said you fell into it, but 2 and some change years later, it seems to be going okay. Can we just back into, how are you getting those type of referrals? Does that work just come to you? Are you out there pitching that? Like that seems like a much more intimate plus long-term commitment for nonprofit clients. And so which in my experience is sometimes hard to get them to commit to. So I'm just so curious about like how that work comes to you. How do you find those clients?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both of those things that you offered. So the first time that I started in this space, it was a referral from another client that I was doing some like organizational development kind of work. She was a new president to an organization and needed to kind of build things up from scratch. And she brought me in to help her, support her. And so when that gig was done, someone on her board had to fire basically someone on their team in a leadership role in their programming department. And so they needed someone to come in and kind of crisis management almost, rebuild cultures, stability, like I mentioned, make sure donors and funders felt safe and felt okay with what was happening with the organization. And so they brought me in. So it was initially supposed to be, I think, a 3 to 4 month term and ended up being close to 9 months. And basically what happens is I do the work, I kind of just so seamlessly, come in and do the work to keep strategy and everything sort of moving forward so they can focus on the search. So that was the first one. And then another most recent opportunity, I actually pitched myself because I wasn't hustling a whole lot once that client ended because I was focusing on a couple of other things. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I need some money. And so actually beginning of this year, I sent out some random, I say it's pretty random pitches on LinkedIn to some CEOs and executive directors that I've been following for some time. I knew I wanted to be in a space with women leadership. I wanted ideally a Black woman or a woman of color, because I hadn't worked kind of in that space in this capacity and consultant capacity. So I emailed a few people, and the timing just worked out where someone was opening a role for a vice president of programming and needed someone to help the team kind of deal with a lot of transition. So that's what I'm doing now. So it's both referrals and outreach.
I love that. And also you must be like a huge wealth of knowledge.
I've seen some things.
Yeah. One of the things I know other people I know who've done interim work talk about is sort of the peaks and valleys, but also busyness and rest. Like I've heard interim work can be very intensive. And, you kicked us off this show talking about rest. And so are you finding the interim work as, intense as if you were in-house? How do you build in time around rest, either like in the day-to-day when you're in a gig or between gigs?
So one thing I do is I don't work more than 2 to 3 days a week. So it's not a 5-day-a-week gig. First of all, I mean, like a lot of organizations don't want to pay for that or don't have that in their budget, or, they probably hired a search firm to manage the search. So it's kind of, doubling up on their budget. But that's how I do it. I work 2.5 days a week. So the other 2.5 days, I'm either with other clients, which I would ideally not like to do, or I'm pursuing kind of other kind of passions and things that I'm working on. So rest is built into the equation for me. Like I would not be able, I don't think, or I would not want to push myself to do a 5-day-a-week in this role. It is intense. There's a sharp, you have to kind of just get in there and get, rev yourself up very quickly and get familiar with the team and the mission and the strategy and all that stuff really fast. So it's really intense onboarding. And then there's a valley where you can kind of actually start to do some things, like efficiencies and support staff members, kind of build new staffing structures or recommend new staffing structures. And so rest is built into the way I operate.
All right. Both Jess and I are dying to get questions in. I want to ask, you mentioned sort of time to work on other passions. And, as someone who is a quote unquote workaholic. Like I always talk about that too, but usually my other passions are also work related. I'm like, I want more time and then I end up doing more work. I would love to hear from you. How are you feeling the other time? Is it work related? Because I know a lot of us, we do want to be creative in our business and have time for that. But also there's other, life is more than just work. So I'm really curious, what are the other things that you are intentional with in terms of spending that other 2.5 to 2 days a week?
So it is work related. So maybe I fit into the workaholic theme. But it's work related that builds in fun, if that makes any sense. So one of the other things that I do is I run a mastermind community for nonprofit consultants, primarily kind of centering Black women who are transitioning from their executive director level 9 to 5 in nonprofit into independent consulting. And so I have a community right now of about 25 women. I started it last January when I was sort of just getting my legs in this consulting space. And I started being more vocal about my journey on LinkedIn. And people started reaching out to me to say, I'm in this space too. Like, how do you do the XYZ? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's figure it out together. And so I built this space for us to do just that. And one of the core tenets is kind of show up as you are, be fun. Some people come with their do-rags and their bonnets on. Some people come like blasting their music. Like, that's a theme of my life right now, just safety, psychological safety, because I just never felt that I had that when I really think back, showing up how I want to show up. It's funny, like these earrings right here, in one of my last organizations, there was a woman who said to me, she was like, Black women get away with wearing the funkiest earrings or something like that. And I was just like, there we go. I'm another already, So, I just wanted to be in a space where nobody's picking and pointing and prodding, and you have to kind of, figure out how you want to fit into the space. So I try and create, those environments and places with all the things that I do. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is I started a retreat, again, to pour luxury and love into Black women. I think that was after 2020, I was just like, look, like the world ain't loving us. So I'm going to make sure I create a space to love us. And so we create, and I want it to be luxury. Like there's a space for like the rustic mountain, using the bathroom in an outhouse sort of situation, which I appreciate. Like I did one of those. I lived in a yurt for a week. It was actually pretty life-changing for me. Like it's what crystallized a lot of these things that I'm doing now. But when I got back from that, I was like, I want this, like with people bringing me a margarita, and I also wanted to see us in spaces that, people might not be used to seeing us in, like luxury, like that's how I'm doing it. Like last year we went to a resort that like the royals frequent when they travel to Jamaica, so I wanted that to be part of our stories as well. Like we were able to be in those spaces too. And so that's the other thing. So it's like 3 jobs. And creatively, I'm also a nature photographer. So I picked that up actually during the yurt trip. And I started doing photography, and that's been really just a place of peace for me. Whenever I'm somewhere and kind of just need to pause and slow down, that's what creates that environment for me.
Okay, this is so good. And I know Cindy's laughing at me because we were just on our own business retreat. And one night we were walking to dinner and we were kind of talking about how cool it would be to host some sort of retreat. And I was just very clear, like, I'm not a camping girl. Like that's just like that. None of that sounds fun to me. Like, so, I mean, I could do probably like a yurt, but like communal bathrooms, just, I stopped there. Like that, just no. And so I'm like trying to figure out how to do it. So I'm so glad that, that you're offering that and I love that you said like in a space where it's not commonly seen. I love that you're creating that.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to go back to is what you said towards the beginning about being in a place where a project ended and you, quote unquote, I think said something like you weren't hustling. And so you had to start doing some pitching. And I found that so relatable because I see it all the time with nonprofit consultants who are so consumed with the work that they don't carve out the space to be marketing themselves for the future projects ahead. And so I'm just curious a little bit about, you mentioned cold pitching on LinkedIn, which sounds very brave to me. I know you are very consistent about showing up on that platform as a thought leader. So I would love for you to just walk us through like what shifted in your brain where you're like, okay, I got to go out there and get it, to then also like, but how do I do that in a way that feels good to me and doesn't, and like, frankly, it worked. Like you pitched, you said, this most recent client. So that whole process is so I'm just so curious about it.
Yeah. So I have it's a case of one. So hopefully like I can repeat this and have the same sort of success. But I would say I've broken it down to myself, like to do this right for me, it needs to be like a 60-40 balance. So 60% doing the work, 40% continuing to put myself out there. During the week, one day a week, I have blocked on my calendar for prospecting and follow-up. So each week I need to be cultivating, I think, or, not cultivating. I don't like the way that feels, but, relationship building, right? Like checking in with folks, seeing how they're doing, and seeing if like the work comes into the conversation, but that's not really the agenda. The agenda is really to check in with folks and see what's going on. I like to know kind of what's happening in the industry, stay abreast on top of all that stuff. The switch for me that happened, I needed the money. Like, my gig ended last March. And if I was smart, I would have started looking harder, like 3 months when things were kind of 3 months out. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do now. So this gig now is like 2 to 3 months. And like right now I'm looking for my next thing for the second half of the year. So I don't even know if I answered your question.
No, that's so super helpful. I think that timeline is really helpful for folks listening. And then I'm just kind of curious about how you like put it in the inbox, on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's funny, in my community, I shared the exact email, like verbatim of what I said. I was like, hey, y'all, like, this is what I'm doing this week. Use this, tweak it, whatever. So I think I said something like, I've been following you for some time on LinkedIn. I'm just going to put it out there. This is what I do. I'd love to work with you. Is there something, that I was so direct, which is not my normal style. But I feel like if you posted something today about this, like you have to ask for what you want, right? They're not going to know what to say they need, unless you specifically say, this is what I do. I want to work with you. Can we figure something out? It was basically the gist of it. Like I put like prettier language or whatever in there. But and I think for those that it speaks to a need that people have that they might not know they have, if that makes any sense. Honestly, like, so I've done this now several times, this interim thing. And I'm like, every organization should be utilizing this, because what it does is it keeps the work flowing. Like where there can be bottlenecks and roadblocks and hiccups, and you're having to deal with personnel issues and people being unhappy and other people wanting to leave, like get yourself, like if you're an ED listening, like get yourself a good 4 or 5 people that are empathetic, have good emotional intelligence, are people, are good managers. You don't need someone who's going to, build your strategy in this stage. That's for the next person. You need someone who's going to come in and support your people. And I don't know why more people don't do that. I've seen it happen where like you can bring someone in and it's not the right fit. So that's why I say focus on like empathetic leaders who are about people. And I think that kind of helps the organization kind of continue to flow.
Amazing. I have so many questions, but I want to stay for a minute in this sort of like direct and clear and boundaries, because the other thing that sort of bring this back to what you do in working 2.5 to 3 days a week with clients, like I hear from other consultants all the time the worry about scope creep, or like if you tell them they're getting this much time, they keep asking for more. And so how do you manage those boundaries with clients? And when does that start? How do you set up? How do you be clear and direct with not only like, yeah, I want to work with you, but like, here's how I work. and I'm not budging on certain things.
Yeah, I don't play with my calendar and my time. Like, it's like, if you're hiring me for 2.5 days a week. So for example, specific example, this most recent client, I work Mondays, half day Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So I have on my signature and my email, these are my hours, these are my days. I may reply to you outside of your hours, but this is when I'm working. I know I do check email occasionally outside of those times, but I don't, like, I force myself not to respond, because you're training then people to understand what your boundaries are, right? And when you're going to be available. They had regularly scheduled meetings on Tuesday, which is one of the days that I'm not in. So I'm like, the options are, you can shift it or I won't be there. That's just kind of how it has to go. And
what did they choose?
Both. There was one, like my smaller team meeting, we shifted the meeting to a day that I could be there. That made sense because I'm leading that team. And I think there's a managers meeting that they kept on whatever today is what, Tuesday? On Tuesdays. So because that can go without me, right? And they can just sort of fill me in when I come back on the important stuff. So I'm really strict. I block the time on my calendar, so no one can put meetings on my calendar. I say I'm out of office, these days. And that's something I learned after my last client, because there was some of that creep. And also, like, for me, like, I wanted to constantly stay abreast of what was going on, and I didn't want to come back to like 50 emails when I did come back. So, I had to learn to be clear up front. And it was funny, one of the women who I had managed at the last organization, she tells people all the time, like, Kamilah didn't play with her calendar. Like, you knew it was 5:00. If you needed something, like, you're going to have to wait until she's back on. So my hope also is that it's kind of freeing for other people to set boundaries for themselves. That's my hope for my team as well. Like, if you're working with me and I have strict boundaries, I hope that gives you permission to also have strict boundaries for yourself, to know that you have a leader kind of, kind of putting that expectation in place, I guess.
Okay, Kamilah, we're back for another round of rapid fire questions. Are you up for playing?
Let's play.
Yay. Okay. So we talked a lot about your luxury retreats. Where is the next spot or couple of spots you want to travel to?
Oh, I want to go anywhere in Africa. It's been on my list. I used to work in an organization that worked overseas and was just about to go before COVID. So Africa.
Okay.
Anywhere,
amazing.
Any country. I don't care.
It's a big continent.
It is.
I'm so curious. What specifically does rest look like for you?
Naps.
Oh, me too. Are you like a 20-minute nap or like a 2-hour nap?
I do both. But I've just gotten into the quick 20-minute, right before I pick up the kids, take a 20-minute nap, and then before chaos ensues. But yes, naps.
I love it. I love it so much. You mentioned that during the beginning of 2020, you started to get into photography. What is something that someone interested in that passion project, where would someone begin? Like, did you go on YouTube? Like, did you pick up a camera?
I bought a fancy camera when my daughter was born, and never taught myself the camera. And then when I was in the year, I brought the books with me to learn the camera. And then YouTube, I spent that week there on YouTube looking at tutorials for how to, work all the little functions and stuff on the camera.
I love that. Okay. And then last question, you mentioned in our interview that you practiced pitching on LinkedIn. What is the best pitch you've ever received on LinkedIn?
They're all usually awful.
Yeah. Totally.
I don't know how to answer that, Jess.
Maybe you haven't gotten one yet.
I don't know that I've gotten a good pitch. Yeah.
Okay. Challenge everyone. Now you've heard it. Okay, cool.
Don't be blowing up my inbox though.
Totally. Okay. Thank you so much for playing.
Thank you. It was fun.
Cindy, do you have one more question you want to ask? Because I want to switch to your group.
Yeah, one more question, because you mentioned this in passing, but I actually think that this is also something that comes up for so many consultants. You talked a little bit about your day you dedicate to just reaching out to people, not necessarily asking for business, but just checking in and keeping those relationships warm. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about why and how you make it really authentic and caring, and what it's done for you.
That's a good question, because I don't know that I put too much thought into it. I think my nature is generally just open, and kind of what you see is what you get, and vulnerable. And that's kind of how I approach checking back in with folks. I'm trying to think. I usually will follow up on, whatever our last conversation was, like something that they mentioned, and just say what's going on in your world. Pretty much is kind of how I approach it. It's been a while since we talked. Let's catch up. And I usually don't do more than like 15, 30 minutes. I don't schedule an hour. It's just we usually do like a 15-minute catch up, because that doesn't feel overwhelming to them either, to put 15 minutes on your calendar. And usually that's enough time. And you said what it's done for me. Was that the other question?
Yeah, but I even have like a mini question in between, which is
okay.
like, and again, this is super practical, but I really think people need to hear it. Like, how do you choose who to reach out to?
People I've worked with primarily. Like, that's the primary thing on my list. Like, I wish I had a better system with it. I tried to do a spreadsheet with I made a spreadsheet of like people that I've worked with on projects in the past, even if it, when I was in my full-time role, we worked with a consultant doing a cause marketing campaign. So like they go on the list. People from grad school, they go on the list, those are again, people that I know. And then for the colds, and I've done some cold outreaches too. I'm trying to be more mindful of local connections. I'm in Florida. So I'm doing more like lunch and breakfast meetups with people now. And again, I'll reach out to them on LinkedIn and say, hey, we both work in this space. I'm really, looking to get to know more folks locally. Like, you want to grab tea or breakfast or something. And that's a sign that I'm old, that I make breakfast meetings now. Like, I'm up at the crack of dawn with my kids, so I'm ready to go. Like, we can meet at 7:30 if you want. And a lot of people have taken me up on that. So not 7:30, but like an 8:30 meeting. But anyway, that's who I ask and how I ask.
I love that, because it's also like, know your audience, and, the idea of professionals who maybe have obligations in the evening or young kids at home. Like, yeah, like the idea of drinks sounds fun in theory and is totally impossible to execute. So I think that's actually really smart. And I love that you're
30 croissant any day.
Sign me up. And I love that you're kind of going local, because I think that, people are so fatigued online, and it's way faster and easier and more effective to build a relationship like straight up in person than it is online. So I think that's super smart.
Yeah.
That was
One
really
thing
good
I'll say
advice
about that. So interestingly, my work is primarily in New York and DC. And I like that for a couple of reasons. One reason is that I can charge higher rates in metropolitan areas. So here, developing relationships here, if my rate's $150 to $200 an hour, that might not sit as well in Florida, as it does in New York City, where they're used to seeing those kinds of numbers. So while I'm making local connections, interestingly, I'm pursuing work in the metropolitan cities.
I mean, that totally makes sense. Totally. I'd love to switch gears just a little bit, because I know that you're also intentionally building this community. And does the community have a name?
It's the Katalyst Mastermind community.
Okay, the Katalyst Mastermind community. And as someone that also builds communities, it's not as maybe easy and fast as people think. And so I'm curious for you to talk about how you're getting the word out about that. do you do kind of like indirect marketing where you're just sharing results of people who've gone through the program? Do people come to the program because they have reached out to you and they're like, I want to hear about your business, or how did you do this? And then you're like, well, we've got this thing. I just know from personal experience how much effort can go into it. And it's usually a slow build. Maybe not for you, maybe yours is rapid fire, and then tell me all your secrets. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious how you manage that other side of your business, which is so exciting.
Yeah. So the timing of when I started, I think, was really good for me. And so when I first decided to do this, again, it was during the Great Resignation, where everyone's sort of considering these sorts of things. And so I started, again, sharing more of my story on LinkedIn, opened it up, and immediately had, like, I think the first we had cohorts at the time was 25 people immediately. And I was just like, oh, this is a thing, And then the second cohort we had was a lower number of people, I think only like 6, but because I increased the fee, that wasn't the best model. And so I learned from that and pivoted and just made it sort of an open membership model, and brought the fee back down. So initially, it was sort of, again, just sharing as I was building online, which I think got people really interested in me and my story and kind of how I was doing it. And then they kind of wanted to be a part of something together. I would love to say that I have a marketing strategy. I do not. And I think, if I were to do it like as a legit business, right? Like if I'm really like this, I'm an entrepreneur, this is what I'm doing. I would, kind of tease up certain times of year. January, people are in the mind of change and new. And so I would do a big push at the end of the year to try and get a bunch of people in January and kind of have them kind of be a part of it. But right now it's just sort of trickling in. I occasionally will post on LinkedIn something about the community, something about like what we're up to. I've done a couple of public, I've kind of pulled the curtain back and let people peek at what we do. Like we did, one of our sessions was open last year on like navigating health insurance as a self-employed person, I did a LinkedIn poll a couple years ago. Like if you wanted to be a consultant, like what's one thing that's blocking you? And the top answer was health insurance. So I brought someone in to talk about that. I brought someone in to talk about that and opened it up to people. So I got some folks on my list from that event. And we'll probably do that 1 or 2 times a year just so people can see. But right now we actually just switched to the Circle platform. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. So I was looking at Mighty Networks or Circle. Right now we're on LinkedIn only. We have a LinkedIn group and then like Google Drive and stuff like that. But I wanted, we're getting in a place where I wanted to be more formal. And so I can do a free trial with Circle. So I'm going to just open it up and let people come check us out, like actually get in it and then decide at that point what they want to do. The most people who have joined have either been referred from other members or they reach out to me and we have a conversation and they sign up. So it's slow. It's very slow.
Which sometimes that's okay, right? And actually, one of the things you said, my like little radars went off. I was like, okay, we need to talk about that, which is you mentioned you were sharing as you were building. And I think it's related to the slow piece, which is like, I think so many consultants feel like we have to have it all perfect or planned or, done before we open ourselves up to the world. And it sounds like your approach is much more organic and create this is the space and, it is what it is. You're welcome to join us, which I think is really powerful in terms of creating meaningful community. So can you tell us a little bit about that vulnerability of putting yourself out there with, as you learn or make changes after you put yourself out there and what that was like?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty high tolerance for embarrassment. And I don't take a whole lot personally. And I like failing. I like, I'm not risk averse. So I think that, again, that's just kind of how I'm built. So it makes it a little bit easier for me. And again, my hope is that me showing up like this gives other people permission to feel like it's okay, or take some of the pressure off of themselves. Because if they see like 89.6% of the time, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing and I'm figuring it out. And they see sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and how I bounce back from that. And all of that's part of it. And I think it's important to share that. I do the same thing with my kids. Like, I remember before I had kids, I was like, I never want them to think I'm a perfect parent. Like, I want them to hear me curse every now and then if it slips out, and let them know that, oh, that's a bad word. This is why, blah, blah, blah. Like, I prefer for it to be a lesson and for them to see that I'm flawed and imperfect, so that they know that they can be, flawed and imperfect and still be beautiful and perfect. Right. So that's sort of just how I show up. And it's worked for me. And like I said, I've managed like teams my whole life. Even if you think about like the dance team in high school and blah, blah, blah. Like, I've been this kind of person and all of that. And I really think it's refreshing. And I wish more people were like me. I wish more people would just give themselves a break, right? And know that it's okay to screw up, and because other people learn from that. And there's value, I think, in seeing how you respond to the screw ups.
I think that you are the perfect person in the perfect space, doing the perfect job at the perfect time, because you are our people, where you're not gatekeeping, you are an open book, and there's such a lack of that in our space. And so I just know that so many people are learning from you along the way. And I think we're all so grateful. As we wrap up this conversation, one thing we like to ask all our guests is, what is your confession? It can be related to your self-development. It can be related to your business. But if you had to confess one thing, what would it be?
Let me think about that. I kind of want to go back to the theme that we just talked about. Like, I'm messy. And not like, I mean, if you look at my table, you will see literally I'm messy, but I'm also like, I'm a lot to handle. And, I think some people can appreciate that. 1 minute I'm going this direction, and if it doesn't feel right, I can very quickly be going this direction. And that kind of create some turmoil, for people that kind of need stability and understanding of things. I think, Jess, this, but like, I'm going through a divorce right now. And I think that, led to a lot of it too, just kind of, like I need constant engagement and stimulation. And, I think that's a lot to handle for some. So, that's a personal confession. Yes.
We appreciate it. Kamilah, where can people who are interested in following you, learning about you, hiring you, get more information?
Thank you. I am on LinkedIn, like we've talked about. Like, they need to start paying me, I think, because I promote them all the time. So LinkedIn, Kamilah Martin is where I blab the most, and I respond to all of my direct messages and that sort of thing. I try and comment when people comment. And then my website is Katalyst with a K, consult with a C.com.
Love it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This is it. I want to keep talking.
I know, right? I wish we could keep talking forever. Yeah. I'll have you back on again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. This was fun. Thank you both.
Thank you again for listening to the Confessions podcast for nonprofit coaches and consultants. If you enjoyed today's episode, which I sure hope you did, you can show your support in one of 3 ways.
Number 1, post a screenshot of this episode to your Instagram stories or LinkedIn profile and tag Cindy and I so we can repost you.
Number 2, share this podcast with a fellow nonprofit coach or consultant.
And number 3, leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to grow and reach new listeners.
And of course, make sure you subscribe so you can get the latest and greatest interviews as they drop every Thursday.
And to our fellow nonprofit coaching and consulting friends, remember, we're an open book and here to answer your burning biz questions.
See you next time.